Hi, everyone. It is my great honor to welcome you to this 30-minute conversation with one of my favorite picture book authors and illustrators, Duncan Tonatiuh, who has graciously offered to give us 30 minutes of his time to answer some of the questions that kids around the world have given us as they participate in the Global Read Aloud. I first came across Duncan's work about 4 or 5 years ago and immediately was drawn in by the illustration style, but also the way that he took these people that we may not know about and made them incredibly accessible to all of us. Reading his picture books aloud to my own young children gave me the push to finally realize that he would be the perfect author illustrator to use for the Global Read Aloud because it once again shows that kids can absolutely take on these big topics in the world and have their own questions. So, the very first question that I have comes from Sacred Heart School in Wolfe Island, Ontario, Canada. And one of Nicole's students asked, Duncan, what did you do when you were 8?
Well, when I was 8, I was born in Mexico City, but then my family moved to a smaller city called San Miguel de Allende in central Mexico. And when we moved, I didn't know a lot of the kids in my neighborhood, a lot of the kids in my school. And my parents had sold the things that we owned in this apartment that we rented when we moved to this other house. And so I didn't have a TV. And so I borrowed a lot of books from my school library. They had these books called Choose Your Own Adventure. And I would borrow the Choose Your Own Adventure books from my school library, and I would read them. And a few days later, I would take another one, and that's when I first became interested in reading and in writing. It was because of that. And around the same time, I also got interested in comic books. My cousins came to visit me. They lived in the Mexico City area. I think it was for maybe spring break or winter break. And they brought a bunch of comics like Spider-Man and X-Men. And so I would read the comics with them. I would collect them, trying to like find old comic books at shops and whatnot. We would also sit around and try and imagine our own superheroes and draw them on pieces of paper and make our own little imprints, our own little comics. And ever since then, I've loved writing and drawing, and that was when I was about 8 years old. And then as I started in my neighborhood, I got to meet other the kids in my neighborhood, and I would play canicas, marbles, and ride my bicycle and play soccer, football, but that's when I first became interested in both writing and reading and in drawing. I can't hear you. Sorry, I think you're on mute, Pernille.
Of course, as I'm trying to turn off my noise. You've said that you were making a graphic novel at Parsons when someone saw your work and came in and said, wait a minute, there's something here and we would love to work with you. And that's how Dear Primo came up. And so do you still, I know my students love graphic novels and comics. So do you still read graphic novels and comics like you did when you were 8?
Yeah, I do. Not as much. Definitely when I was in high school and college, there were some that I was very inspired by, like Mouse, um, which is about the Holocaust, and Persepolis about the revolution in Iran. There's one called Palestine that I really liked. And I not as much sometimes with my kids. I have a daughter that's 6 and a son that's 4, and so sometimes we'll read, comic book format books, short graphic novels, and whatnot. But I know there's great ones out there. I feel a little bit out of the loop, but I definitely love the format, of both writing and drawing, and that's definitely a big inspiration for what I do.
So, Mr. Sedwig's third grade class in Grand Ledge, Michigan, wanted to know, in your stories, we know the spirit dog is important to your culture. We have not seen many cats in your books. Are cats an important part of your culture? And do you have any future books about cats?
Yeah, so that's a good question. In this book that I did, Feather Serpent and the Five Sons, you can see there the dog is a short squinkle, a hairless dog. Um, And so some of the books I've written take place in Mesoamerica, in the Americas before the Spanish and other Europeans came to this continent. And so these were the kinds of dogs that were around. And were definitely a big, they were very important for different people like the Chica Aztecs, the Maya. Um, I don't think there were domestic cats around. I've drawn a lot of jaguars, or I've drawn some jaguars in some of my books. So I guess that would be, kind of large cats, um, wild cats in some of my books. And I did a book that I didn't write, but that I illustrated called Salsa. And in that book, there's both a dog and a cat that appear prominently. Um, my son really wants a dog, and my daughter really wants a cat. So maybe I will be drawing more cats in the near future.
Apparently, it's a need, according to this school. The Schenck School in Atlanta, Georgia. Uma wanted to know, because of Dear Primo, do you write to your cousin or did you when you were a child?
Um, I wish I wrote more to my cousins. I have on my father's American, so I have cousins in the United States on my father's side, many of them, at least 10 cousins. Um, and then on my mother's side, my mother was Mexican. I also have a lot of cousins, and and I wish I were a little bit more in touch with them. I currently I'm in Mexico for the time being, and I have cousins that I'm very close with, and that I spent a lot of time when I was in high school and in college. So I miss them, and I should write them more. Um, and also my cousins in Mexico. So I have lots of cousins, and I should write them more. I don't write to them enough.
One of the questions that came up, and unfortunately, I can't see who it's from, but I think it's a good question, is just did you hear some of these myths that you've ended up using in your story when you were growing up? And if you did, who told them to you? Like, how did they come into your life?
Yeah, so some of them I did, So for example, the Prince and the Warrior. Um, well, when I first did this book, um, I had already done Pancho Rabbit and the Coyote. And Pancho Rabbit and the Coyote, a big inspiration for it was the Little Red Riding Hood, the Gingerbread Man, different fables. And so I was trying to do something like that again with a book. And I thought of maybe I could do sort of like a twist on a story that people know. And so I thought of maybe like Puss in Boots, but instead of boots, he could wear sneakers and be in the city or something. And I wrote it and I changed some things, but it wasn't that different, that original. And then I thought of like Hansel and Gretel, and I changed some things, and maybe they can be Juana and Greta, and but it wasn't that different. But then I thought of Sleeping Beauty, and that made me think of the sleeping woman, La Mujer Dormida. This volcano is Iztaccíhuatl that's kind of shaped like a woman laying down covered in snow. And so I remember the story of the two volcanoes. That's a story that a lot of kids in Mexico know. Um, I probably first saw it in one of my textbooks when I was in elementary school, but it was just a page. It was just they mentioned very briefly. It wasn't like a whole book or a whole picture book. Um, and so then I thought of taking that story, what I remember of that story, and learning more about it and doing my own version of it. So this one, for example, The Prince and the Warrior is one where I had heard it as a kid. And then this one, for example, Feather Serpent. I didn't know the stories of Feather Serpent or Quetzalcoatl that well, but I definitely had heard about the Feather Serpent, about the god Quetzalcoatl. He's sort of very um, um, prominent, but also very mysterious, sort of in different Mesoamerican cultures and depictions. And so I wanted to learn more about it. So I learned a little bit more as an adult about it, but I had heard about the feather serpent, about Quetzalcoatl since I was a kid. Um, but yeah, that's a bit of how I came across those myths, those stories.
Do you share these myths with your own children then? Are there stories that you want to make sure that your children hear as they're growing up?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I definitely wanted to have a wide variety of myths and of cultures that they know about. And yeah, I've definitely shared my books and others that talk um, about these kinds of myths with them. I'm trying to think if there's other ones that um, there's lots of other, or there's other ones that I definitely want to kind of explore and learn more about. And while doing, for example, I did this book. I didn't write it, but I illustrated it, called Child of the Flower Song People, about Luz Jimenez, which was an indigenous woman. And she wrote, she's one of the persons that collected some of these stories. And while learning about her, I discover more of these myths and more of these stories and more of these legends. So maybe in the future I'll do something with that. So I was very happy to illustrate this book because it led me to learn some of those stories that she preserved from her indigenous tradition. And there's some really great ones there.
And that's actually a perfect segue into another question from a Brook Forest Oak Brook in Illinois. And they said, are there other myths or stories you would like to adapt or take inspiration from or rewrite?
Yeah, there's several others. There's I can't think of the name of the book at the top of my head, but there's a collection of stories that is they weren't written by her, but she's the one that told the stories for someone else to write. And there's several good ones in there. There's one that I really like about Tepoztlán, um, um, which is there's sort of this mountain also in the state of Morelos, near Mexico City, that also has sort of like an origin story about it, and other ones about these brothers working together. They get a different gift from their father. So those are some ones that I've thought about, that I think could be neat and could make good picture books.
Well, judging by the comments from the students here, they're just so ready for you to write so many more. They're so excited about your books. Radney from Cahaba Heights wants to know, have you ever felt like you wanted to give up children's writing?
Um, no, I mean, I didn't, from the time that by the time that I was a teenager, I knew I wanted to pursue a career in the arts. I was very interested in drawing, was very interested in writing, but I always thought or I thought I could do something for adults, maybe write for a magazine or a newspaper, or write a novel, or do paintings that hang in galleries, or be a photojournalist. I had these different ideas of what kind of path I could take. And it wasn't until I had almost graduated from college that I met an editor at Abrams, a man named Howard, and I had the opportunity to do my first book, Dear Primo, and it sort of went on from there. And I get to both write and illustrate. I get to learn about things that I'm interested in. That's one really great thing about being an author and illustrator, is that I get to research things that I'm passionate about and I want to learn more about, and then share it with others, and share things different issues of social justice that I care about. So no, I love doing it, and hopefully I'll do it for many, many more years, because I'm very, very happy doing it. It can be frustrating at times. It can be challenging at times because, like when I write something, it never comes out perfect the first time. I always have to revise my work. And sometimes I'll write something and I'll share with my editor, and he'll send it back full of questions and comments and things crossed out. And, I've been spending all this time trying to put this manuscript together, and to then see it, can be a little daunting at times, but I know that makes the book better eventually. So it'd be challenging at times, but I've never thought of giving up. I really love doing it, and I hope to do it for many, many more years.
We hope so too. Also from Cahaba Heights in Birmingham, Alabama, Rivers Kenyon wanted to know, which book out of all that you've written do you feel has had the most impact out in society?
I'm not sure. I think Separate is Never Equal is definitely the book that most people know me for, and I think it's been used in a lot of schools. A lot of people are um, are familiar with the story. So this is probably my most famous book or popular book that I've done, and I think it's in the case of this story, it's nonfiction, and it's a true story. Um, and at the time where the story takes place in the 40s, children of Mexican descent were not allowed to go to school with white children. But the Mendes family and other Latinx families in California filed this lawsuit and fought to change that. And eventually California was the first state to desegregate schools. And I think one of the reasons why so many people respond to this book and why it's been so popular is because it's a very important piece of American history that not a lot of people know about. It's not a very famous story, but it's a very important story. And hopefully, I think it has had an impact in helping more people know about this case, but just about, just that different group of people have had have suffered great challenges and injustices, and that it takes brave, courageous people to stand up against that.
I would agree. I use it. So I teach seventh graders, but we use your picture books as well. And often the reaction when I read that story to them, it's this realization of, oh, there were other people, other groups of people that were also working for the same things, where they always are like, well, we mostly hear about like Black civil rights. And it really like opens up their eyes to like, wait, who else was going through and fighting for these things that we take for granted? So it's such a great just invitation into those conversations, even for older kids. And that's again why I love your work so much, because it speaks to the 5-year-olds, but it also speaks to like the 12-year-olds and the 15-year-olds and the adults. And that's an incredible talent to have. And so Miss Reed's class in Syracuse, New York, all second graders, they wanted to know, how did you train yourself to do art like your style, like the ancestral style? What did you go through there?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't always draw like that. Like I said, when I was a kid, I liked comic books. I also like manga or Japanese animation with the big eyes, the cartoons with the big eyes. And later on, I've had many different interests. In middle school, high school, I was very interested in political cartoons. And I was very interested in painting and painters like Van Gogh, like Hugo Chile. But when I was a senior in college, I had to have um, a senior project. And I came to the US when I was about 15 years old. And as I spent more time away from Mexico, I began to miss things that were around me growing up. The food, the music, different traditions. And so my different classes at my university, especially, I would often tie it to my Mexican background and find ways to connect my different assignments to that. And so when I had my to a senior project, I decided to do it about a friend I had met at a worker center where I sometimes volunteered, named Sergio, at a worker center called NMAS, National Mobilization Against Sweatshops. And Sergio is Mixtec, which is an indigenous group from the south of Mexico. And there's a large Mixtec community in New York. And there's a lot of Mixtec guys that work in kitchens as delivery workers. And I didn't know this until I met him. And I thought his story was very interesting. And so I decided that I wanted to make a project about that. And then that would be my senior project. And here, let me just grab it really quick. And one of the first things that I did when I decided that was going to be my project was go to the library at my university and look at make artwork. These are images from the codices, from the books that Mixtec people made. They fold out these really large books that told of the gods, the warriors, the kings. Because there's modern day Mixtecs, but they're also a civilization similar to the Aztecs, to the Mayas, that built pyramids, that had their own language. I had some sense of drawings growing up. Like I remember in one of my elementary school books, textbooks, it had a picture of the Aztec calendar. It's like this round stone with the sun sticking its tongue out like this. And I had, like San Miguel, there's some market where so codex-like crafts. But I was interested in other things growing up. I was interested in comic books and manga and different things. But when I saw these drawings years later, after I had lived in the US for many years, I decided I wanted to do a drawing in a similar style. And so these are images from that book, journey of a Mixteco. And that's why I started drawing like that, always in profile, the way I draw the ears. And eventually, the book, I was able to publish it some years ago.
I love that book.
Undocumented Workers Fight. And it folds out like that. Oops, backwards, like an accordion. And kind of compiled it into one. And so it's about the journey of coming to the US, but then it's also about the organizing effort, about them, filing a lawsuit and organizing at this restaurant and protesting in order to get better wages and better working conditions.
And it's such a
So
powerful book.
That's how I came across this. That's how I developed my drawing style. It comes from looking at these kinds of images.
So Lisa Porter's class, kind of speaking in that same vein from Wheeling, Illinois, they said, your work inspires us. We come from the United States, Mexico, Ecuador, and El Salvador, and we see ourselves in your work. We love how you connect your books to each other. And they wanted to know, do you model your illustrations after anyone, or are they all kind of invented people?
They're mostly invented people. Every once in a while, I'll include, like, I have one that it really looks like my cousin or a few people that I know. In a book that I'm currently working in, they don't necessarily look like my children, but they're definitely sort of inspired by my kids a little bit. And so, but I guess they're mostly made up, other than someone that I really know or see. But with my books, even though they're very stylized, I'm trying to get a good example. So even though, for example, The Prince and the Warrior, the story's made up and I have a very kind of stylized way of drawing, I still always I still always do some research. So, for example, when I did The Prince and the Warrior, I tried to look at the way people dressed in pre-Columbian times, and some of the weapons they use, some of the buildings they built. Even though it's not supposed to be realistic, I still want my drawings to be accurate, especially if they're taking place in a specific time period.
And I think that's why they're so rife for inquiry and questions, right? Because we know that even though you invent parts, there's still so much historical accuracy and venues for us to learn more. I want to be really mindful of our time. So I have 2 questions left that came through. And one of them was just, what is your best advice for people who think they can't create, whether it's reading or writing or create anything?
Well, for example, if you're interested in writing, my suggestion would be to read a lot. I became a writer because I enjoyed reading, and then try to read like a writer. Think of, what is this author doing? Do they start the story is it a chronological, or do they start at the end and go back? Is it told from one voice or from many voices? Who's telling the story? Is it the main character? Is it someone's friend, or is it a third person? And for me, like, good art, good books make me want to write, make me want to create. Like, I remember reading a book named El Llano en Llamas, The Burning Plain, an author named Juan Rulfo, when I was a teenager, a Mexican author. And he writes in the first person and very vernacular, the way people in the countryside speak. And I had never encountered that in a book or paid much attention to it. And so then when I read the story, I was like, this is so cool. I want to try it out. I want to write a short story in the first person, the way people talk. So that would be a suggestion, to read and find inspiration. And I think the same applies for visual arts. I think when you see great art, when you look at different people, like, there's not one correct way to draw. There's different many styles, and you can look at the way that different people make art with different tools, different techniques, and experiment yourself and figure out what works for you. So that would be my best advice for anyone that wants to be a creator, is look at other work and get inspired by it.
I love that. Final question. Besides being an incredible writer and illustrator, Do you have any other secret talents, maybe silly talents or things that people don't know that you're actually really good at?
Um, well, I mean, I love spending time with my kids, and I think I'm a pretty good dad. I'm not super good at it. I like doing capoeira, which is it's a martial art from Brazil. It's kind of a combination of dance and martial arts. And it's something that I still can, there's people that are a lot better than me, but it's something that I'm very kind of passionate about. And it's sort of what, like a hobby of mine that I've done consistently for many years. So that's something that's how I spend my free time, or one of the places where I spend my free time. Um, yeah, that's mostly, between my kids, my work, and capoeira, which sometimes drives my wife a little crazy that I want to go off and do my class or something. But that's mostly how I spend my time these days.
Any final words for all of the kids that will be watching this when it gets released? Here's your chance. No pressure.
No, I'm so happy that you're reading my books, using my books. As an author, sometimes it can be a little lonely, so to speak, because I'm in my office, or I'm, in my house working. I'm not like in a school or a place with lots of other coworkers. Um, but it's really rewarding. It's super rewarding to then see people respond to the books, and I love it. I especially love when students, when teachers do projects with the books and kind of this whole other life. And it's very, very exciting to me to see people responding and using their books in their classrooms. I feel very, very lucky that I do what I do.
Well, we are so grateful that you're in the world and sharing your talents. Thank you so much for giving us the gift of your time and the gift of your books and your work. We know that the Global Read Aloud is so grateful for everything you've given it. So thank you so much for spending time with us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy that I got to be a part of the program. I feel very lucky.